Is the big Destiny vs. Brexit stream debate today? I don't think it's ever going to happen. I guess, like, I understand that people get really passionate over certain issues, but the Brexit shit that I'm seeing is, like, the people that comment are just, they're quite amazing. Oh my god, he doesn't even know how the fucking EU works. Oh my god, you're actually a fucking aspie. Go do some research instead of making crass statements like a retard. They had fucking racial quotas for their own fishing grounds. Is he referring to, like, the environmental fishing regulation shit that they had? Because I'm pretty sure those agreements would still have to stand internationally, even if you weren't in the EU. And secondly, weren't they actually, like, legitimately running into problems with fishing things going extinct because people were overfishing the fuck out of their oceans? Do you really think that the majority of the people voted to leave the EU because of fishing shit? I mean, like, I feel like people are really reaching. Why would you even comment if you don't know the reason for leaving? Was it really fishing? The UK didn't get any sort of say over any laws that governed their people. Is this actually true? So the EU made all the laws for the United Kingdom? Because all the things that I read made it sound like that it was like fucking 3% of things, or not even, or like 3 different laws. I would have to go back and find the exact things, but I keep trying to find, so to support this argument, because I keep seeing it come up a lot, I keep trying to find where are the examples of all the laws that the EU passes down to the UK, and I just can't find them. It's always like 3 or 4 different small random things that are kind of mandated by the EU, and that's it. But, like, I keep trying to find this idea that the EU is, like, writing all of these laws for British people that they have to follow. Like, I just can't find it. I can't find any of these things. It would be nice if people would link a single thing in any of their comments, but they never seem to do. They never seem to do that. They were sick of not having democratic rights. What does that mean? All of your leaders and everything in your own country are still completely elected. So they left the EU. It's that fucking simple. People who voted Remain should have just not voted because a Remain vote was an anti-democratic vote. Is this even like a real word? Or isn't this like an oxymoron? You've done research on some of your shit before, but this one was super triggering. You clearly had no idea at all what the fuck you were talking about, and you still spouted rhetoric. You're turning into an SJW, Destiny. You're mocking arguments with rhetoric before even examining them, before even knowing what the fuck the argument was. Why? If you feel like so passionate... if you feel so passionate about this, why wouldn't you link a single source in your thing, backing up a single thing you've said? Welcome to my channel. Who is this guy?
Hey, I'm Nuxie, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I do Pokemon Showdown videos, including tutorials, guides, cool team spotlights, and highlight...
I don't know. But whatever. But, like, this is, like, the trend of, like, all of the, all the comments. They did not have control over a lot of their own laws. Oh my god, why would you even make that assumption? Do some fucking research, you pleb. Is this how Trumples in chat feel? Fucking Jesus. Nah, I can't. I'm rage quit on this vid. Check the pound, you aspie. What does that even mean? Why would you even say check the pound right now? What is that? Why would you even say that? Destiny refuses to watch the entirety of that first video, and he thinks commercial fishing laws are a non-issue. Once Destiny makes up his mind about something, it is impossible to keep him from backflipping into a mental abyss. Why not just start barraging me with links of shit telling me of how wrong I am? I don't understand. Like, if it's that easy, right? If I'm that... Like, if I were to say something, like, if I were to come at you with an argument, like, dog, hydrogen has 2 fucking protons. Like, everybody fucking knows this. Like, it's what hydrogen is. Or hydrogen has 2 electrons. Like, that's just how hydrogen always is. It's how hydrogen is, right? Like, people could post like 50 million things telling me that I'm wrong, or telling me I'm retarded. Or if I were to say things like, dog, like, third parties in the United States have always been represented really well in Congress and really well in our presidency. Or there's been a lot of people of different types of religions that have been presidents of the United States. Or, like, there's 50 million other things that I could bring up. Like, the United States was the sole reason why Europe was able to win World War II. The United States contributed more to that war in defeating Hitler than anyone else, especially the Soviet Union. Like, if I were to say things like this, like, you could just throw millions of links at me, like, Destiny, you're wrong. Look. And I'd be like, oh, fuck. Like, what do I say at that point, right? Like, I can't say, like, oh, shit, I guess I'm wrong. But instead it's just, like, screaming. Sure, then I'm sure Googling sovereignty wasn't hard either. I'm surprised you didn't. You normally Google words you don't know. Well, yeah, if I don't know a word, of course I'm gonna Google it. Why do people simultaneously make fun of me for claiming that I know everything, but then they make fun of me when I Google something I don't know? What does that even mean? Should I just pretend to know something if I don't? Of course, if I don't know something, I'm going to fucking Google it. What would you expect me to do? Pretend I know what it is? What the fuck? The English were losing their ability to control the laws that govern them. Like what? Name a law. Why can't people name a law? Well, I hate it when people... You notice how in my last video, in my last Monday mail, when I was talking about like life experiences or things that I've learned about, how I'd always list examples afterwards, like, oh, well, like there are some things, do I have any regrets? Well, I've done some things, but I've learned things about them. But instead of just leaving it at that, you're like, oh, like, well, when I did this thing, I learned this thing. And when I did this thing, I learned this thing, right? Why not name something? The fishing laws are just the biggest example of these laws affecting the layman. Really? The fishing laws affected the average person in the UK, and the fishing laws were the #1 reason why people voted to leave the EU, and how anyone it affects cannot change it ever unless they leave the EU. Aren't a lot of these fishing laws set up as like international treaties and shit, where people that aren't even in the EU still have to abide by some of these international agreements? I could be wrong on that. That's just like what I've read. Like, The Independent. Oh, this looks like it supports my point of view. I don't want anything to support my point of view. We'll seek out the Xenex Bear, you or meme, right? It's just amazing showing that you controlling nobody voted. We'll just go through some of these comments. I read all my comments on my YouTube, believe it or not. So that's why I get so triggered about the Brexit thing, because people keep commenting on these videos with like... The main argument was that Britain can't change anything that happens to its country as a result of the EU. There are many trade laws that don't affect them anymore, but it's unlikely that they will not be able to trade with EU countries. It's likely the trade laws will stay the exact same to cut costs on both ends. Does anybody actually believe that? Why can't you source like an economist or some kind of international trade expert that would support that opinion? That's a pretty big claim, right? The other argument was a little bit tinfoil hat, and that is that the EU is attempting to form a super state with its own treasury, and most recently, plans for its own army. That's bullshit. I heard this on the fucking radio the other day, and I went and I looked it up. The EU was saying some bullshit about how they wanted to have like commanders from different countries come together to meet, to work together to better synergize like shit that they do across Europe. Not anything having to do with the EU forming the EU army. That's actual propaganda. That's actual far extremist right propaganda that has no basis in reality. But the more integrated countries are into the EU, the harder it is to leave, especially when you're using their currency, which Britain wasn't, and especially if the EU has an army, which it didn't. The EU is never going to make the EU army. What the fuck? These are the two main two arguments for leaving. So what were the main arguments? Was the EU forming a superstate and the EU forming an army? So the second one has never been confirmed to happen. And then I guess the first one is the EU forming a superstate. I don't know, I guess. I mean, okay. The main arguments for staying were, it's spooky out there, we can travel all of the EU if we stay, and it's going to cost money and temporarily damage our economy. Oh, but I want everyone to be united and loved and all other hippie shit. That's really, dog? That's your fair comparison of both sides? If you compare them on a democratic rights perspective, leave easily wins. I'm happy to talk to you about this on Skype or something, but this comment should suffice. As for the NHS bus bullshit, it's not like the $350 million is going into thin air. It's going to be spent on whatever the government wants to spend it on. It's a tiny point that $350 million a week was leaving the country, but it isn't anymore. A word about Sargon of Akkad. His Brexit videos were not a good example of his content. He's a classical liberal who is passionate about democracy, but his Brexit videos were very holier than thou and had childish name calling. His content on the whole is usually level-headed rational debate. Is this guy here? Embarrassing. This election season has turned Destiny into an archetypal, ignorant American, commenting on things he has no understanding of. He's right about this, lol. He probably knows a lot more than the average UK, but hey, he's nowhere near informed as all the internet politics and economic experts, especially ones that like politics. Oh, wait, hold on. Does he actually put out an argument? There is no argument or insight from Destiny to counter. The embarrassing part is that you would highlight this rant. I'm pretty sure this is not even a rant. Isn't this just me talking to that one dude on... Hold on, I don't actually know. Or, I mean, I don't have to call you fucking retarded. I've got fucking media right here that fucking agrees with me. Fucking carry. Oh, shit. Okay, maybe I was talking in chat a little bit. Is it across the entire fucking world? Talks to the big... Okay, never mind. I think they could have taken a watch. I guess this is kind of a rant. But, okay. Can you name one U.S. law that discriminates against people based on race? This is oppression and privilege you can't give any proof of, but I should take your word. Exists? Yeah, if there's no racist laws, a black president and anyone can become rich and famous if they try, then I don't see the problem. Sure, there are ghettos, but white people are there too. It's not just a place for dumb black people. The problem with autistic SJWs like you is that you think you can rely on some BS chart to decide who the least privileged is. Like a trans black woman is the lowest on the ladder, so she should be given extra privileges in society to make up for your BS perception of the world. Even though that woman could have been born into a super rich family and never worked a day in her life, and was accepted everywhere she went, whilst a white poor guy in a ghetto would receive no sympathy from you because he is white. Basically, you are racist as fuck. Whew! Yeah, except all those studies get debunked. You probably still believe in the pay gap, lol. Okay, well, there is economic benefits to leaving, like not paying the 12.9 billion pounds they paid, or euro? Pounds, they paid in 2015 to the EU, having a more free access to the global market, lowering prices, and controlling who enters the country, preventing economic immigrants from benefiting without contributing. How does the UK have more bargaining power on their own than bargaining on behalf of the EU? I don't understand that. I'm pretty sure the UK can already control who enters and leaves their country, but okay.
Wow!
What an idiot. Holy shit. Oh, hey, another Destiny clone. Every third word is autistic. Glad I don't watch this shit show anymore, but I still show up to watch YouTube videos, I guess. Why are you here then? To trigger Destiny clones. Always works. Got him, dude. Intellectual, dishonest Destiny clone acting like he didn't know what I was saying. At least you phrased it like the usual Destiny tweet. I cringed a little bit. This is actually unbearable. I can't believe I actually once thought Destiny was at least kinda smart. I'm sorry that I don't have a giant red telephone in my kitchen that puts me straight through to Senpai. Also, I'm not gonna write out a whole political treatise in a YouTube comment, dog. I just don't enjoy listening to uninformed opinions. Calm down, buddy. I still love the Rust memes like every other memer. Also, you can disagree with me, just don't use irrelevant info or wrong info. I'm sorry, I stopped watching when you started repeatedly ranting and strawmanning instead of thinking, so I have no idea if you changed your mind. Britain is a market, and leaving the EU opens the doors for non-EU countries to better compete with EU countries to access that market. Thus, open competition between markets gives Britain leverage. In fact, the EU lost leverage against non-EU countries with Brexit, and EU's market is in decline. Brexit can be thought of as a symptom of that decline. This is going to be a thing we wait and see rather than settle on armchair debates. But the fact that what you said doesn't take into account what I've pointed out. How does separating... What does this even mean? You know when you go to negotiate with your employer and you try to negotiate like a better wage or better benefits or things for safety, and then the employer sees like a union, and then the employee's like, dog, you're negotiating as a union? That's never going to work. And you're like, oh shit, you're right. So then you leave the collective bargaining of the union to negotiate on your own behalf, and then you always get a better deal that way when individuals negotiate instead of unions. What does that even mean? Okay. Just go ahead and link me shit if I'm wrong. Never watches more than 5 seconds of a video. LOL, okay? Again, I'm pretty sure that if I said something blatantly fucking wrong, that you could link like 50 million different things to prove it. If the only way you can prove me wrong on something like this, or if I ask for like, well, give me like a good reason for the UK to leave the EU, and you have to link me like 2-hour fucking videos. I'm not gonna watch a 2-hour video. The EU controls 70% of UK laws. Destiny says UK had no control now because UK can make its own laws. Where's the link for that? What? Source on that number. You're not going to get a source from anime lolly pick guy. Destiny, can you please click my link? What about it? There's an EU law principle that whereas a conflict between European law and a law of member states, European law prevails. The norms of national law have to be set aside. Principles develop. Yeah, sure. This is pretty standard in any kind of federal system. Can I say federal? It's the same in the United States, where federal law supersedes state law. But the states have input into federal law much the same way that members of the EU have input into EU law. I mean, this isn't very surprising. If you don't have, if you can't rule from the top down, then the top becomes pointless. If everybody can just make laws to overrule the top body, right? That's pretty, I mean, I would expect that, right? Destiny, what about this reason? Milo? To stop Muslim immigration. Do I want to watch a 7-minute fucking Milo video? I don't know if I can handle doing it, dude. Oh, God. I got my hot chocolate right here, dude. I got my hot chocolate.
I'm Milo Yiannopoulos, and I'm here at the last frontier in Girdwood, Alaska. You might be wondering why I'm spending time in America, so much time in America recently, and less time in my native Europe, and that's because I've seen the continent change very dramatically in my 30-odd years on the planet. Britain prides itself on being a nation of immigrants, and to some degree that's certainly true. But Muslim immigration is different. Muslims haven't integrated in the way that other previous waves of immigrants have. In fact, successive generations, in particular the Pakistani community, are getting worse, not better. We're sending hundreds of fighters to ISIS, nearly as many as Belgium, which is a hotbed of jihadism. Part of the problem is our media and our politicians. The idea that you can't criticize somebody or identify a problem or solve a crime properly for fear of being called racist led to 1,400 girls being raped in Rotherham. Sweden, once a bastion of progressive values, a feminist haven, is now the rape capital of Europe. And police there are even banned from putting the ethnicity of alleged rapists on police reports. There's now a Muslim crime wave in Europe. It's a crime wave that politicians don't want to address, law enforcement can't address, and the media is covering up. Just think about how long it takes for any of your news stations or newspapers to mention the M word or the I word after the latest terrorist atrocity. Yet those terrorist attacks, in particular the ones in France and Brussels recently, were committed by a mixture of homegrown terrorists and fake migrants. We're so dumb, our immigration services are so completely incoherent, confused and unable to do their jobs, and our politicians so dishonest, we can't protect our borders and we can't protect ourselves. This is a difficult subject and one that many Europeans don't want to address for fear of coming across as racist or somehow bigoted. But if we're not honest about the problem, we can't fix it. And now is not the time to worry about being labeled by the left-wing press just because you are justifiably concerned about the changes happening to your communities. As a gay man, I'm not so worried about GDP. I'm not even principally concerned with British sovereignty. I'm worried more about the influx of a culture that wants me dead. We saw that just last week in Orlando in Florida. The biggest...
I don't understand why I was linked to this video. I very specifically have been called a fucking retard many times for saying that Brexit had a large part in immigration. I don't understand. Does Milo agree with me here? Which button do you push?
Senseless, the deadliest and most horrifying mass shooting in American history. And let's be completely clear, and again, this is an uncomfortable thing to address, but this wasn't radical Islam. It wasn't terrorists. It was mainstream Islam that did this. Consider a few statistics if that is off-putting to you or you find that awkward. In a Gallup poll...
Oh, we're going to go back to the...
Out of 1,001, that's 100% of British Muslims, told pollsters that they found homosexuality to be an unacceptable lifestyle choice. 52% of British Muslims in a later poll said they wanted it made illegal. 39% of British Muslims, this is British Muslims by the way, not Muslims in Syria, this is not Raqqa, this is London, this is 2 streets away from where you live. 39% of them think a woman should always obey her husband. These are regressive attitudes. These are terrifying attitudes for modern liberal capitalist democracies that have fought for decades to give women and minorities...
Destiny, you said that, but you always acted like concerns of immigration were retarded and not valid. Well, it's a two-step thing, because one, I don't think leaving the I feel like I've talked about this a million fucking times on stream. RTBA, you've seen me say every single word. RTBA, what do you think I'm going to say in response to your comment? Because you already know what I'm going to say, so I don't even know why you would say it. So go ahead and tell me what you think I'm going to say in response to your comment. I know you know what I'm going to say. I really don't. I've said a million times that if you've got problems with immigration, that's all on you. The United Kingdom, for the most part, has pretty much complete control over their fucking immigration. You're not part of the big fucking agreement on the free travel bullshit. You guys are allowed to more strictly screen people that come in from other countries on your fucking passport control. Even that little fucking tunnel bullshit, the whatever channel tunnel thing, you guys get to screen people on the other side. There's like a dual fucking point where you guys get to have your own screening process. Like, I don't see how leaving the EU all of a sudden helps you with any of these things. Like, you already have control over all of these things.
Minorities the rights that they deserve. This culture is coming into Europe. For hundreds of years, Europe was a mesmerizing and unique place in world culture. It was the pinnacle of art, music, philosophy, history, science, you name it. This is the continent of Hume, Hobbes, Shakespeare, Mozart, and Wagner. But something's happened to that continent recently. Something has changed as a result of unaccountable and incompetent globalist bureaucrats. The nature of the continent is changing, and it's becoming defined not by those incredible innovations, but instead by fear. France, the motherland of Berlioz, Cézanne, Debussy, and Monet, now has no-go zones. The police don't enter there. Why? This is what we've allowed to happen to our civilization. This is what we've allowed to happen to our communities. To my mind, this is the single greatest threat to the stability, safety, security, and happiness of you and your family. Britain doesn't need to share this fate. It doesn't need to buy into the suicidal open-door refugee policies of Germany or the no-go zones of France. The UK has a brighter future, or at least it could do if it makes the right decision this week. I was in Orlando last week, the site of the deadliest shooting attack in American history. And it was committed, of course, by a Muslim who hates gays. In my hometown, London, we've elected a mayor, Sadiq Khan, who's called a moderate, but he cozied up to some pretty ugly individuals in the past when he was an advocate and a lawyer. And people are starting to ask questions. They're starting to wonder why the minute he was elected, his wife donned a hijab. Why he's having segregated rallies where women in headscarves are standing behind men. Why he's picking fights with Donald Trump because the presumptive Republican nominee had the audacity to say, maybe America has a Muslim problem. And now Sadiq Khan...
Okay, I get it. Okay. Destiny, regarding something Milo said, why actually does Germany want refugees so much? Well, I think the leadership is pushing for it to show how nice and progressive and open Germany is. I don't know. I don't think a lot of people are... It seems like there's a lot of pushback against it. I literally linked in chat multiple times, 6-minute video of someone making coherent arguments about why they should leave the EU. Click.
Tonight, for the Leave side of the proposition, please welcome Conservative Member of the European Parliament, Daniel Hannan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm inviting you to make me redundant. And indeed, in the bargain, make Nigel redundant. And I wouldn't be doing that if I were not confident that there will be plenty of openings for newly unemployed MEPs in the boom that will come to this country after we've left the European Union. And I'll tell you why I am so confident about that prediction. If I put it in one word, it would be obsolete. We just heard from Chucker that these are not the 1950s. He said it as though he was imparting an original insight. Absolutely, these are not the 1950s. And that's why we have outgrown a top-down dirigiste construct, a hangover of an age when freight costs were high and refrigeration was expensive and regional trade blocs looked like the future. But my friends, that world has been made completely redundant by technological advance. This is an age of the internet, of cheap flights, of Skype. It's as easy to do business with a company in New Zealand as with a company in France. In fact, easier, because the Kiwi company will be English-speaking and common law. Never before has geographical proximity been as irrelevant as now. So why?
What do you mean irrelevant? Traveling and acquiring visas for work is still a really big deal. Shipping product to other countries and dealing with importing and exporting is still really complicated. I mean, sharing memes on the internet has gotten easier, sure, but international business is still relatively complicated. I don't understand his point.
Why do we tie ourselves to the one part of the world that is not experiencing significant economic growth? Over the last 10 years, China's economy has doubled in size, India's economy has doubled in size.
Why are you comparing yourself to China and India that are massively developing nations? Why would you ever use those as comparisons?
Ethiopia's economy has doubled in size, but the Eurozone,
If you want to go back to what China was like in the 50s and 60s and what India was like in the 50s and 60s, I'm sure you could experience a similar economic growth. Those countries are still playing catch up in a lot of different ways.
incredibly, was the same size at the end of last year as it had been in 2006. Every continent on this planet has grown over the past decade, except Antarctica and Europe. Now, we are a trading people, we're a maritime people, a people connected by language and law, by habit and history, by commerce and migration to every continent and archipelago. We don't sit on great natural resources here. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. That means we have to be where the customers are. And as long as we're in the European Union, we cannot sign independent trade agreements with non-EU countries. The EU deal with Australia is being held up because some Italian tomato growers are currently challenging it. The EU deal with Canada is being held up because of an unrelated dispute about Romanian visas. How have we put ourselves in a position where we can't do those deals? Liz cited a few of the big international quangos and the Davos men who tell us that it's in our interest to stay. She said there's nothing in it for the little guy. Let me cite a couple of people who are leaders of the Remain campaign. Paddy Ashdown says, if we leave, it'll mean cheaper food. And Lord Rose says, if we leave, it'll mean higher wages. Now, I would have thought that if Liz is really interested in the interests of the working people that she says she's speaking for, she would give more weight to those opinions than to those of the tax-free Michelin-starred international quangocrats who she sees as the arbiters of our national interest. Why are we paying to belong to the world's only stagnant customs union, paying £19 billion gross, £11 billion net every year, right? To put this in context, in the last, we just heard about the cuts and, the Labour MPs were standing against all these coalition reductions. In the last parliament, the 2010 to 2015 parliament, according to the IFS, the entire austerity programme saved £36 billion. Over that lifetime of that same parliament, our gross contribution to the EU was £85 billion. Our net contribution was £42 billion. So even if you insist on taking the net figure, that one clean excision would have wiped out the whole of the austerity programme and still given us enough left over to take a penny off income tax. But it's not just the financial price. It's the democratic price. We fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that laws should not be passed nor taxes raised except by our own elected representatives.
Hey, we fought one of those wars too.
Supreme legislative and executive power is held not just by people that you didn't vote for, but people who generally owe their position to having just lost elections, like Peter Mandelson and Neil Kinnock and now Jacques Sutton. It's only when they've been expressly rejected by their electorates that they are invited to come and legislate for us anyway. Now, look, if the EU were about cooperating, if it were like NATO and all the things that Chuck was saying, no one would have a problem with it, right? You'd have to be insane to be against the idea of working with neighboring countries. Can we take it as read that all of us on this platform, all of you in this room, are in favor of cooperating with our immediate neighbors and allies? The problem is that it presumes to legislate for us, that it wants to take on the attributes and trappings of statehood. No one is talking. I mean, Nick trotted out all the cliches about drawbridges and throwing away keys. No one is talking about isolation. Right? Nowhere else in the world do countries apologize for wanting to live under their own laws. New Zealand is not about to join Australia. And we don't go around saying, oh, these dreadful Australo-skeptics, when are they going to understand that they're a small offshore island clinging to outdated notions of sovereignty, right?
Why? Do you think...
Japan is not applying to join China, as far as I'm aware. And people don't say, oh, these bigoted Sino-skeptics, when are they going to get it through their heads that they've lost their empire? It is...
Does he really think these are fair comparisons?
They're a small offshore island clinging... Apologize for wanting to live under their own laws. New Zealand is not about to join Australia. And we don't go around saying, oh, these dreadful Australo-skeptics, when are they going to understand that they're a small offshore island clinging to outdated notions of sovereignty, right? Japan is not applying to join China, as far as I'm aware. And people don't say, oh, these bigoted Sino-skeptics, when are they going to get it through their heads that they've lost their empire? It is a natural, healthy thing for a democracy to live under its own laws while trading and cooperating with every other country in the world. We are the 5th largest economy on the planet. We're the 4th
I think it's 6th largest now, isn't it?
military power. We're one of 5 members of the UN Security Council. How much bigger do we have to be before we have the confidence to raise our eyes to more distant horizons and rediscover that global vocation which we once took for granted?
This guy's a really good speaker. I disagree with what he says, but... Okay, I need to do stuff. Okay, listen, we need to do... Do you want to have a quick talk as to why the UK won't leave the EU? I'm pretty sure they have to now. Like, you can't go against the people after you do a vote like that. You can't just say, we're just kidding. Like, you can't do that. I'm pretty sure. I don't know, I guess we'll see.